So in the theoretical framework, I think the most important things to know there is helps identify the principles of change. So we are very thankful as a community of developers of management for tools that come from Barrett and from Graves and from Donbeck and whoever. Because these are tools that we need to use to deal with this complexity, because you can only fight complexity with complexity. You either have to attenuate the complexity or you have to fight it with complexity. And you can't come with simple solutions in the process. I have an indication that my 30 minutes have been reached, so I'm just going to do quickly this, because I think you need to understand it for the exercise. Richard Dawkins, in that Selfish Gene book that he wrote, spoke of a meme. Now, a meme is almost like the DNA, almost like a gene. I think he's mimicking on that. But it's like a cultural gene. And it uses the mind as a host, and it jumps. Basil, it's not entirely your moral virus, but your moral virus could be one of that as well. But this meme are the things, and this is where Donbeck and Graves come in and they say, yes, these memes are important, but they are typically the things, they are kind of surface values. These are the things that we talk about around politics, religion, etc. So now for those who are not from South Africa, you may not understand this, but the others will. So on the surface, it would look as if Malema and Eugene de Blanche are two different people, because they seem to be very opposite. Graves says those are surface memes. Underneath the surface, there are these deep running value system currents. They are like magnets. They attract those memes. They actually determine the conversations there as well. So you may find and these are those colors on the different levels, those value systems, and that's why they added the little V to the meme, because they speak of value memes as a system. So they will attract it, and if you analyze it under the surface, you will actually find that a Malema and a Eugene de Blanche, they are coming from the same color code. They just make a different sound on the surface, but structurally, from a value base, they come from the same place. And that's what's so funny in our papers and in our reporting, is that we report on these things as if they are different, but if we sit still and analyze them and just apply our minds, we see that they actually come from the same clan. They just name them differently. So if it's then true that our worldviews are such important determinators of our behavior, if each of these layers that Graves has constructed for us, if each of them represents a certain set of psychological, biological, sociological, spiritual value sets, how then do you go about, when you use your convening power as a business school or as an entity that develops this, even internally in organizations, when you get them together, how do you present your material, in what way, to make a shift towards what, with whose permission? And who determines where does this group need to be moved towards? Who determines that? From what value system do you determine that? One of the things, and one of the areas, and I think this is what has been said today as well, one of the things we need to do is to move away from this mostly unquestioned and unexamined assumptions about the nature of reality. We should stop dumping content on people in an environment and get them into conversations deep conversations around these issues, because this is where we start influencing. This is where the memes and the V-memes start jumping and influencing like DNA viruses, and it starts spreading in the process. So that is a summary of what they have done. I've put it in there in terms of the completeness. This is just the interesting thing that I'm trying to relate to you. If you apply this, and sorry, this is a bit an old one, it could be updated, but that little thing, I think it may be touching yellow, but not yet, that line. But now you see South Africa in terms, if that is the basis of from beige up to turquoise here, if you plot us in South Africa, that's more or less how we pan out in the process. Now compare that with the United States, and compare that with Europe, and compare that with Sub-Saharan Africa. You can imagine that we have problems in our relationships with other business schools from Europe and America on a plug-and-play basis. You cannot just bring that information, those techniques and whatever, into this context and make it work. You throw the switches, the lights don't go on. Why? They're not connected. They're not connected. So this is an immense challenge for us in the formation of values on this continent. It is not something that we can do with pre-packaged programs that we have on the shelf and go and replicate it as far as we go in the process. So how should Wu teach whom to do what, when? Because we cannot avoid this. We cannot say it's too complex. We have to transform the resources of the continent to the benefit of the people. They sit in companies in powerful positions. We need to influence those minds. How do we do it? Because to be able to express our values in our lives, we need to develop the skills to behave according to those values. So if those values are coming from a yellow-green world, how do we get there? Because conceptually we can buy into that. How do we get there? How do we get a critical mass of leaders to get to that point? Okay. I would like the greenies and the yellowies and the bluies and the, what's the other color? Pinkies. I would like you to sit in groups of, say, 3, 4. Otherwise, we get passengers. 3 pinks together, little clusters of pink, yellow, etc. Go through that scenario, use about 10, 15 minutes. Please, this is not going to be an assignment that anybody is going to mark. Just have a conversation and get from that conversation something that you can abstract and share with the rest. All right, can I hear from the blue grouping? Just share 1 or 2 learnings that you think the rest of us should take note of. I think so. I think so.
I'm going to sum up what our group felt in terms of this topic. Yeah? After the debate, and it was a heated debate, yeah, we realized that sometimes we underestimate the power that we have as individuals. Because as you all know, leadership is all about influence. So each one of us, therefore, we should accept the fact that we are leaders. Let's not always blame our leaders out there if things are not going our own way. If we strongly feel that this leader is not promoting the culture or the values that we want to see in our society, maybe let each one of us ask ourselves a question: what have I done to make sure that I influence the person sitting next to me? Because by us influencing one another, I'm sure we can change the leadership that we have that we may not be satisfied with. That's our view.
Do you think it's responsible leadership, but it's also responsible followership?
Because at the end of the day, we nominate these leaders, and when they're not doing what we expect them to do, what do we do? In most cases, we just keep quiet. And we're saying we should now stand up and be our own leaders and maybe influence our own in whatever way that we wanted to do it in terms of promoting this culture.
Professor Leonard.
Sorry, no, I was just interested. What was your issue or your question?
Well, the issue was, when all said and done, our leaders drive the culture that we see in our organizations because of the values that they have. In most cases, they may not have the values that we want to see in our respective societies. So if that's the case, then it's up to us probably to be a silent majority that's going to influence them to live the values that we feel are the best values to aspire for.
Was that question on the blue paper, or was it?
It was, can I add something?
Yes, please.
The issue was the paradigm that divides the world into social sector, private sector, and governmental sector is not working. How can we make them working together? A part of our discussion was that there are things that the denominator as a human being that governs the three sectors is the denominator, the common denominator is that we are human beings, okay? And if we go back to what hinders us as human beings to work together, there is lots of things that is very common, and this is very internal. So we had this part of, we need to coach every single person alone about maybe the cultural issues that hinders our talking together. Maybe your father or mother said to you that if you talk to somebody who is white, this is a bad guy. So when we sit together to work on the business level, this is what comes to my mind. So that is a hindering effect. So we need to go back to revisiting as a concept, to revisit all the cultures, all the things that we are brought up with, all the things. So we need to revisit as a concept. And one of the main things also we need to revisit and go back deeper as a human beings to the assumptions and the fears that hinders our work together. And one of the main things that we really need to ponder and think about, that God has created every single person of us, whether God or the Big Bang, I don't care. But I will use God, okay? God has created every single one of us as a masterpiece. And this is proven by science. This is not what I'm saying. This is proven by science. So every single one of us here in the world is a unique DNA, which means that you provide a certain ingredient nobody on this whole world has. So I need you. It is a fact. I need you, not even your twin or something. So if we ponder about this, the self-esteem will be raised. Nobody else, if you are still here on the 20th of September 2012, and you're not dead, this means the world needs you. You have something to give to the whole world. You're a unique puzzle that every single person of us needs you. And if we bring every single sector to understand that, as human, we need to connect back as human, to connect this, then the self-esteem will be raised. Then nobody else should tell you that you are not, that you're nothing. No, no. We should stand up for you as a human, and we should work on those things. Yeah. That's what we said in the group.
Yeah, and if I can push that into another dimension, I almost have this sense of public sector, private sector, civil society. And they need to be separate, but they need to be separate with equilateral distances. But what happens is, in terms of development and conversations, when a business school positions itself or an entity, the training is mostly taking place for them, or it happens here. And then if there's time left and money, we will do something for civil society in the process. And I think we should start positioning ourselves in terms of the development and the conversations over here and convene these people, because a lot of what's going wrong is the disconnect between these three big plates that are actually governing the landscape on which we operate. And from that gap comes a lot of misunderstanding and also a lot of corruption, especially on this continent, because of that gap. All right, then Pink. Who will speak on behalf of Pink? Arnold. There's a mic.
Yeah, Frik, I think we sort of said, why did you have to ask such difficult questions?
Because I don't have the answer.
Because in a sense, we have just warmed up to the questions, and the questions that we've been dealing with were questions such as, what should business be for in the 21st century? Is there a value shift needed in business? And if so, from what to what? And then the role of schools of management in this formation of values. And I think what came up from the groups is that these questions, I think, are confronting us in a very specific sense, because we realize that we are people in the midst of a transition, realizing sort of that we're coming from a place that is not as healthy as what we thought that it would be, and we as yet probably do not know really where we are going towards. So within that context, I think the next sort of layer of learning that we had in the discussion was about complexity. And maybe the one thing that we need to say is that in the face of complexity, that's a good starting point, realizing that we do not necessarily have the answers. Facing the complexity and dealing with it, that's a healthy place to start with. So that nothing is as obvious that we might thought from our own value systems and our own frameworks and paradigms that we're so in love with in terms of working. There was another thought that we thought was quite helpful for us, and that was the idea around partnership, collaboration, and eventually also mixed with Ubuntu. Where Ubuntu, as an African expression of what it means to share and collaborate, where Ubuntu might offer us a specific African context for talking about things such as sustainability and so forth. And maybe then a last thought that I would just like to throw in, especially when we talk about sustainability. Sustainability is counterintuitive. We talk about sustainability because we're coming from a place where we realize that we've messed up. There is not enough for all of us. And how do we change? Africans on this continent comes from a place where they've always known what it means to do a lot whilst having a little. That's the true essence of sustainability. So we should not talk about sustainability coming from a high ground. We should probably talk about sustainability for a change from the point of view of people that have never been used to having a lot, and see what they have achieved with having a little. So some of these ideas came out of our discussion.
Any other Pink opinions? All right. Green. So, Richard, I'm doing some free advertising here. So.
Good. Yeah, I'm happy with it.
Being green. Okay. Anyone? Ah.
Hi. We started off by saying the focus within a business school should be around values. And there was a debate about what does that mean, and how do you then shift people from a particular color to another color, or different value sets. And that led to, well, you start by meaning. You start by purpose. So by understanding that business is broader than just money and financials, by understanding that, and if you look at Raj's model, plus the planet, inside the planet is society, and inside society is that business. So you look at it as broad as that, and by starting on that premises and building on it, by building in the values to say, if you look at Manny's presentation this morning, as well as some of Raj's and some of the presentations yesterday, it was about you build a solid foundation of values. So when you hit a crisis, It's not about the systems, it's not about the education, it's about saying, in this crisis, what are the values? When I make a decision, am I living by my values? And I think one other point was around making sure the purpose is strong and uniting that. Oh, the debate around was whether do we show the maps or do we not show the maps because there's more than one map. And I think it was kind of, you show the map with the understanding that we're kind of giving you a broad spectrum view. How you travel through this journey is personal and it's up to you. And you have to make those steps in terms of transforming and moving to the next level. And as a leader, if you're leading that company, it impacts the culture and obviously the people and then ultimately society and the planet.
Can I add to show the maps or not show the maps? If, and I think it's part of a very important approach. If I were a hypnotist, and I'm going to pick on Basil because he has a tie. If I were a hypnotist and I would ask Basil if he would join me up here, and I'm going to hypnotize him in the process, and he's willingly, and I hypnotize him, and I tell him under hypnosis, Basil, every time I'm going to touch my tie, you are going to remove your jacket. 1, 2, 3, awake. So we stand on the podium here in front of you. You all know he knows nothing. We start speaking. And in the conversation, I just touch my tie. Basil says, would you mind if I take off my jacket? No, not at all. Do it. He does. As he puts it down, and he turns around, and I'll tell him when I touch it again, then you will put your jacket, and he puts it down, I touch my tie again. He's somehow in trouble because he just asked my permission to take off the jacket. He puts it down. He doesn't know where this comes from, but he has this need to put this jacket on again. As a rational, assumingly rational being, he has to explain his behavior, either to me or to himself. So he says, I don't know what's going on. I don't know whether I'm getting sick or something. And as he puts it on, and he turns around to me, I touch my tie again. Now he's in serious trouble. Because he has just explained why he's putting it on again, and now he wants to take it off. For some reason, he wants to take it off. Now I de-hypnotize Basil. I explain to him why. He's got an understanding of his behavior. I can now touch my tie 1,000 times. Basil won't take off his jacket. I think when we give people insight into their behavior, sometimes we are in our business education, we run around with too many recipes, 6 ways to influence this, 7 ways to do that, 5 ways to do this, 10 ways to do this, and we just run on the surface, but people don't understand what is the underpinning theories or assumptions that are driving there. And we need to create a conversation where people have insight, because the moment they have that insight, the paradigm shifts. The paradigm shifts in total. Because if I'm standing here and I get you to stand on the other side there, and I ask you, I'll put a chocolate cake, brie cheese, glass of water, and a laptop between you and me, and I ask you, please memorize the terrain between you and me. I'm going to cover your eyes. I want you to walk here. Don't step on these. In the meantime, I've asked him, when I cover your eyes and start walking, please remove all of this. His removal of this will change the way that you walk towards me, not a ticky. Because in your mind, you hold the map of the chocolate cake, the brie cheese, the glass of water, the laptop, and you walk accordingly. So somehow I stop you because you can hear the giggles in the audience. I remove your mask. I show you. You feel a bit silly, but you start walking in a normal way towards me. Why? Because you have changed the map that you hold in your mind. And we think that the map that we hold in the terrain is the same thing. It's not. It's not. And that, I think, is a crucial point where we need to give people insight into what is driving our behaviors and why are we doing the things that we are doing, and that we are many more times alike than we are different in the process. Any other green ideas?
We also said that having the conscious capitalists teach, do know some of the ways. So even though we want to appeal to meaning and purpose, we also need to appeal to the bottom line and say, you know, this is the most successful way to do this. So making sure that, and that also helps put in the rules, like this specifically mentions that our compensation things are way out of whack. And so saying, you know, most conscious companies have a 20-to-1 rule. So bringing in that practical side of it too.
By the way, just to add to that, we're just writing a paper right now. We've looked at about 250 companies and the ratio of executive pay to average pay and the correlation of that to employee motivation and engagement and customer satisfaction and loyalty. And we're finding strong negative correlations. The higher that ratio, the lower the morale, lower the engagement, and the lower the, and that's a much larger sample of companies as well. So further evidence of that. As soon as I finish writing it up, maybe within a month or so.
All right, please don't try and read that. It's just to indicate that's the question, that's the color. Can I get input from the yellow group?
So as you can see, we had the longest one, so we had to speed read. The small bit that I will just read to you is that we stand at a junction in a road, so we can either continue playing the developed world's economic game of musical chairs, hoping that when the music stops, we are not the ones left without a seat. This is a dangerous path leading to a disrupted world. The alternative is to attempt something fundamentally different, namely to develop the well-being of all of us, and indeed of all living things, while respecting the limits of the planet. So we actually ended up having quite a long-winded discussion about what the question was, because there's a lot of questions contained within this sheet. We sort of reached the point at the end that we might be answering, how do we ensure that we have leaders equipped to resolve the complex global issues that lie ahead? So when we looked at management education, which was part of the question, it came up that in Egypt, in fact, 7 million people are employed in the government sector and only 1 million in the private sector. So it wouldn't really then make sense that we put all our emphasis on like business schools. But in fact, what you brought up later shifts our thinking, if we'd had that bit of insight, that the role of business schools needs to change so that it's not purely, you know, situated in the private sector. So maybe I should return to where the point we reached at the very end, which is not so much who are we going to teach, what is out there, but that the change needs to be in us. So it comes back to the Gandhi quote we saw this morning, be the change you want to see in the world, instead of wondering who out there we need to teach. So work where you are. We spoke about circles of influence, that came up in another group. And we realized each of us has influence in different areas, and we can only work in the places that we understand, the systems that we understand. So whether that be, for example, someone said, teaching mothers in communities about growing, you know, subsistence farming, that may be one place we need to start. In your church, that may be another place. Increased faith, that may be another place to start. The context will determine the content. I think you said that earlier. So who should be taught? Yeah, mothers, parents, the different influences in society. There's not one group, but using existing structures seem to us to be more sensible than trying to create new ones. And the idea of experiential learning, and that came back to what your group was saying about insight. Insight is where people really learn. You can't walk in there and teach, but if people have the experience, that shift in perspective, that will stay with them forever. So whatever programs we have, it needs to be experiential learning. Did my colleague Bongi, do you want to add anything to that?
What we also added is the part of the context. Speaking from the African context, that and also coming down to South Africa with abject poverty, we need to teach leaders in villages, in townships, in churches, in suburbs, every human being, because a leader in a village and a leader in a suburb have got different context. And each leader needs to be empowered at the level of his environment and at the level of his understanding, so that the values that he will display to his community will be the values that he believes in. And the whole community will look up to those values, and there will be a change. Thank you.
Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. We are out of time with about 7-8 minutes. Thank you for allowing me to fiddle around with your mental furniture. Hope I haven't upset it in any way. If you want to continue this conversation, 18 to 21 November, we have the conference here also hosting it on the GRLI, the Globally Responsible Leadership Initiative, where we speak of, and we use the concept of Africa Leads as the theme and the overall umbrella for this. And we do it also with the University of Pretoria in their Responsible Leadership Center. And it will be hosted here. I think it's at Spear, where some of you ate last night at Moyo, on that estate. That's where the conference will be. There are brochures out on the table there, and I think what we have learned from each other here, hopefully it could make some kind of a difference where we go and act as leaders when we leave this conference.